I'm afraid the family has already decided you'll get nothing, Uncle Gerald declared, his voice slicing through the stale air like a judge delivering a death sentence. His smugness filled the old brownstone in Charleston, South Carolina, where we had all assembled for the reading of my grandmother Eleanor's will. The warmth of her memory was still fresh in my chest, but clearly not for them. My name is Eliza Harding, I'm 29 years old, and I've spent most of my life learning to make peace with being invisible in my own family. Across the room, my cousins Marissa and Evan sat beside their father, Uncle Gerald, nodding along like brainwashed jurors. The way they looked at me, you'd think I had wandered into the wrong house. Apparently, the week after Grandma Eleanor's funeral had been less about mourning and more about division. Not of grief, but of assets. The house, the jewelry, the bank accounts already spoken for as if I didn't exist. The house goes to Marissa. She has a family, needs the space, Gerald said, giving his daughter a fond look. Marissa's eyes gleamed, likely imagining her Pinterest boards finally coming to life. Evan gets the trust fund. He's working on his app startup. Gerald turned toward me. And you, Eliza, well, you're welcome to take a few of her old cookbooks. Or maybe some kitchenware. I'm sure you'll find something useful. I sat frozen in the corner chair, the same one Grandma used to sit in when she helped me with schoolwork or listened to my childhood secrets. I studied their faces. No shame, no doubt, just entitlement. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that Eleanor Harding had been watching them more carefully than they realized. Alan Foster, the family lawyer, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Even he seemed dismayed by how casually Gerald had hijacked the proceedings. But Gerald had always been the dominant voice in the room, forceful, confident, and manipulative enough to make others believe they agreed with him out of their own volition. Marissa clapped her hands together lightly. So, when can I start bringing in the decorators? We want to move in before winter. Before the body was even cold, they'd taken the crown and scepter. Evan, not even pretending to mourn, said, already contacted First Savannah Bank. They just need a copy of the will to initiate the transfer. I didn't flinch. Didn't interrupt. I just reached slowly into my bag and touched the USB drive. A tiny, weightless thing that could turn this entire performance into rubble. My fingers wrapped around it like a soldier's hand around a grenade pin. Grandma had known what they were. And she'd made sure to leave me the tools to expose it. Eleanor Harding wasn't just my grandmother. She was the woman who raised me after my mother died in a car accident when I was 12. My father was never in the picture. So I arrived at Eleanor's doorstep not out of choice, but necessity. But I never felt like a burden. She never made me feel that way. Gerald, on the other hand, never hid his contempt. To him, I was a reminder of a mistake my mother, his baby sister, was too soft, too reckless. My existence threatened their polished family image, and so they wrote me off. While Gerald built his career in wealth management and moved to a gated golf community, I helped Eleanor manage her prescriptions. While Marissa traveled Europe with her doctor husband, I drove Grandma to her endocrinologist appointments. When Evan missed her 85th birthday because of a networking retreat, I was spoon-feeding her soup during her post-surgery recovery. But Gerald always believed himself the rightful heir to everything Eleanor owned. He thought he could manipulate her the way he manipulated clients. What he failed to see, what they all failed to see, was that Eleanor was never anyone's fool. 6 months before her death, Eleanor and I sat in her kitchen, her face unusually pale, her hands trembling. Gerald brought over papers today, she said. He wants me to sign over power of attorney. I froze. Did you? She smiled bitterly. No. I told him to take his little scheme and shove it where the sun don't shine. That night was a turning point. After that conversation, she became more private. New lawyers. New folders. A locked safe I wasn't allowed to touch until the right time. 3 weeks before she died, she sat me down and gave me the USB. There will be a performance, she said. Let them have their moment. But then you show them what matters. That small flash drive now burned in my purse like a holy artifact. The official reading was set for that afternoon, but Gerald had already anointed himself executor of everything. He insisted we hold it at Eleanor's house, not the law office. More family-oriented, he claimed. But I knew better. Control. He wanted to control the setting, the tone, the outcome. Marissa arrived first, dressed in a tailored beige pantsuit and wearing her designer sunglasses inside. "I've already got movers lined up," she said to Evan, ignoring me entirely. "We can strip this place down by Friday." Evan nodded. "You guys want anything from the wine cellar? There's a few vintage labels down there." They were laughing. And then, at exactly 1 p.m., Alan Foster entered, briefcase in hand. He wore a dark grey suit and the expression of a man preparing to be hated. "Before we begin," Gerald stood up, assuming the stance of a man giving a quarterly investor report, "I'd like to remind everyone that we've come to a family consensus about how Eleanor's estate should be handled. Marissa gets the house. Evan gets the accounts. I'll take care of distributing the rest." We all knew what she wanted. Alan cleared his throat, his eyes flicking toward me just briefly. "Mr. Harding, the will must be read in full before any such claims can be considered. That is both standard and legally required." Gerald waved dismissively. "Of course. But I spoke to her. This is just a formality." "Oh, Gerald. You have no idea how formal this is about to get." Alan opened his briefcase slowly, deliberately, like a man opening a vault that he knew contained explosives. The family quieted as he pulled out a crisp envelope stamped with Eleanor's initials. The room was heavy with expectation. Marissa adjusted her seat, Evan leaned forward, Gerald clasped his hands like a king awaiting tribute. "I, Eleanor Margaret Harding, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament." The words rolled off Alan's tongue with the mechanical cadence of legal ritual. And yet, every sentence was a loaded trap, because I knew something none of them did. This wasn't her real will. It was a decoy. A clever imitation designed to lull them into a false sense of control. Eleanor had told me that if they wanted to reduce her life to a list of assets, then she'd turn the list into a lesson. And the lesson was about to begin. "To my son, Gerald Harding," Alan continued, "I leave my jewelry collection and personal furnishings, in recognition of his role as head of the family." Gerald smirked. "As expected. To my granddaughter Marissa Jacobs, I leave the family residence, with trust that it will provide a safe and loving home for her children." Marissa practically squealed. "See? I told you she wanted the house to stay in the family. She didn't. Not even a little. I knew for a fact she hated what Marissa had become, a synthetic mother of 2 designer children, always more concerned with brand names than birthday calls. To my grandson Evan Harding, I bequeath my savings and investment portfolio, with hopes that it will support his entrepreneurial endeavors." Evan finally looked up from his phone, satisfied. "Solid. That'll help with launch costs." And then, silence. I felt the shift in the air. Like the moment before lightning strikes. Alan cleared his throat again, softer this time. "And to my granddaughter, Eliza." Every head turned toward me, some with pity, some with triumph. "I hope she finds peace in knowing how much her companionship meant to me in my final years." Marissa rolled her eyes. Evan stifled a laugh. Gerald gave me a sideways glance, one eyebrow raised like he was waiting for me to cry. But I didn't. Because the line wasn't over. Alan looked up, right at me, and asked gently, "Eliza, do you have the item Eleanor entrusted to you?" I nodded. Heart racing, and reached into my bag. My hand closed around the USB drive like it had a heartbeat of its own. I stood and placed it in Alan's palm. "What's that?" Gerald demanded, the first crack in his polished facade. Alan, surprisingly calm, walked to the antique desk against the wall, where Eleanor's laptop still sat, dusty but functional. "I believe this will provide clarification," Alan said. The screen lit up in a blue glow, and a moment later, Eleanor's face filled the frame. She was wearing the pale lavender cardigan I gave her last Christmas. Her silver hair was neatly brushed, and her gaze was unwavering. If you're watching this, it means my decoy will has been read, and the family believes they know my wishes, she said. They don't. A beat of stunned silence. Marissa's jaw dropped. Evan leaned forward so fast he nearly fell. Gerald's face lost all color. I created a false will, Eleanor continued, because I needed to know, beyond doubt, how each of you would behave in my absence. And let me say this clearly, I am deeply disappointed. Gerald stood up, stammering, "This isn't legal. This is senile rambling." But Eleanor kept speaking, unbothered by his protests. "Gerald, you tried to convince me I was losing my mind. You came into my home with a power of attorney document and expected me to sign it like a clueless old woman. But my mind was clear. My heart was clearer." She paused, folding her hands in her lap on screen. "Marissa, you visited me 4 times in 3 years. 3 of those were to ask for money. You said I was too old to notice when you took heirlooms from the attic. But I noticed. I always noticed." Marissa gasped. "That's a lie." "Evan," Eleanor continued. "You missed every major holiday and birthday, but somehow remembered to send me investment pitches. You even asked me to co-sign a loan last April on my hospital bed." Evan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I kept records. Emails. Messages. I logged every visit. Every transaction. Every favor you asked." And then, her tone softened. "Eliza." My breath caught. "You gave up so much to care for me. You missed promotions, you cancelled vacations. You held my hand when I cried over memories I couldn't share with anyone else. I couldn't stop the tears. I didn't care if they saw. You are the only one who stayed when there was nothing to gain. And for that, you deserve everything." Alan turned from the laptop, clearing his throat. "There is another will," he said. "It was filed with Eleanor's private attorney, Ms. Joanna Reese, of Charleston Legal Associates. It overrides the one read today." Gerald slammed his fist on the table. "This is outrageous. You can't do this." "She did," Alan replied calmly. "And if the video is verified, and I assure you, it will be, then it is binding." Eleanor's voice returned one last time, steady as ever. "If you feel wronged, I encourage you to ask yourselves why. I didn't leave you out. You excluded yourselves. This is not revenge. This is balance." The screen went dark. No one spoke. For once, Gerald had nothing to say. The silence in the room was suffocating. The only sound was the quiet hum of Eleanor's laptop, still glowing faintly after her explosive video message. Marissa sat frozen, her perfectly glossed lips slightly parted. Evan stared at the floor, blinking like he was trying to wake up from a dream. And Gerald, he looked like a man who had just watched his empire crumble in slow motion. Alan cleared his throat again, though this time with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen justice gently knock on the door. "I've already spoken with Ms. Reese," he said. "She's prepared to meet with us first thing tomorrow to begin the probate process of the actual will." "You expect us to believe this?" Gerald snapped, regaining just enough of his composure to go on the offensive. "This was a manipulated video. You have no idea what state of mind my mother was in." Alan calmly replied, "Eleanor passed every capacity test in the months prior to her death. We have documentation from 2 doctors confirming her mental clarity. The video is time-stamped, the will notarized. You're welcome to contest it in court, though I advise you to think carefully before going public with your behavior." Gerald's jaw clenched. "This is character assassination." "No," I said softly, but clearly, standing now. "It's character revelation." Gerald turned to me with cold fury. "You planned this with her." I met his eyes. "She planned it. I just didn't stop her." Marissa suddenly stood up, knocking her chair back. "This is ridiculous." She was senile. She didn't even remember my kids' names the last time I visited. Maybe because you only visited when you wanted something, I said, my voice steady but trembling with the weight of long-held truths. Evan finally spoke. So you're telling us that Eleanor Harding, the woman who raised us, left every last cent to you? I nodded. Not for being blood. For being present. The irony wasn't lost on me. 4 years, Gerald had built a career counseling others on legacy, how to divide assets, how to preserve family bonds through financial planning. But he never understood that legacy wasn't about wealth. It was about love, and memory, and presence. Eleanor knew that. She always did. 3 weeks before her death, I had sat across from her as she opened a metal lockbox on her bedside table. It contained 2 items, a thick legal envelope and a flash drive with a small purple ribbon tied around it. I know how this will look, she had told me. They'll call it betrayal. Manipulation. Maybe even elder abuse. I had protested, of course. You don't have to do this. You can just write a fair will. Split things evenly. She shook her head. Fair and equal aren't the same. I'm not doing this to be cruel. I'm doing this because they've forgotten who I am. Now, as I looked around the room, I saw the realization settling into their eyes, slow, jagged, painful. Gerald would never accept this. Not without a fight. His ego was a fortress. But even he could feel the cracks. Marissa stood stiffly, arms crossed. I hope you enjoy that moldy old house. You'll need it when you can't find anyone to tolerate you. You mean like you tolerated Grandma? I said, voice soft but cutting. She scoffed and stormed out, her heels clicking hard against the floor like punctuation marks on her exit. Evan followed moments later, muttering something about lawyers and how this isn't over. Gerald lingered, glaring at me with a complex cocktail of contempt and something else, something almost like fear. This won't stand, he said. You're not family. You never were. I stepped closer, just enough to hold his gaze. I was her family. That's what matters. He stared at me for a long, long second. Then turned and left. I stayed behind with Alan as he gathered his papers. The weight of everything hit me at once, and I sat down on the edge of the couch, feeling suddenly lightheaded. She really did it, I whispered. Alan looked at me with a trace of a smile. Eleanor Harding was the sharpest woman I ever knew. You don't outmaneuver people like Gerald without thinking 5 steps ahead. I nodded. She knew exactly how they'd react. She didn't just want to reward you, Alan said. She wanted to teach them. I thought about that. About how Eleanor had orchestrated everything like a final lesson, recorded, notarized, timed to the minute. About the weight she'd carried knowing what her family had become. She wanted to be remembered as more than a wallet, I said. She will be, he replied, standing up. Starting with tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house in the quiet darkness, pausing in each room like a visitor to a museum. The scent of Eleanor's lavender sachets still lingered in the linens. Her cane leaned against the armchair. A pair of reading glasses sat beside her favorite book of poetry. I ended up in the kitchen, the place where she and I had spent hundreds of hours together. I opened the fridge and saw the last batch of homemade chicken soup I had prepared for her, still sealed in a mason jar. I didn't cry. Not then. But when I sat at the old wooden table and saw the empty chair across from me, the chair where she had once taught me how to braid dough and fix a broken heart, I broke. Not because of the money. Not because of the house. Because I missed her. Because she was gone, and yet she had left me with more than anyone else ever had. A voice. A place. A truth. The next morning, the sky was a pale grey that seemed almost intentional, like Charleston itself understood what kind of day this would be. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the sleek downtown offices of Rees and Chapman, where Eleanor's real attorney, Joanna Rees, waited behind a pane of frosted glass. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 40s, with wire-framed glasses and a calm, clinical demeanor that suggested she'd seen the ugliest sides of family inheritance disputes and survived. Miss Harding, she greeted as she stood. Come in. The others are already here. The others. Of course. I stepped into the conference room and was instantly met by the cold stares of Gerald, Marissa, and Evan. Their body language screamed restraint, but their eyes. Pure venom. Joanna motioned toward the chair opposite hers. Let's begin. Gerald leaned forward before she could say another word. Before we do anything, he said sharply, I want it stated, on the record, that my mother was under duress. This girl, he motioned toward me like I was a stain, manipulated her. None of this should be considered valid until it's proven in court. Joanna calmly turned to him. Mr. Harding, we have 4 certified psychiatric evaluations from the past year stating your mother had full cognitive function. We also have a signed and notarized video will, corroborated by timestamps, biometric markers, and cross-referenced with documents filed at this office under tight chain of custody protocols. Gerald's mouth twitched. Marissa slammed her hands on the table. She left everything to her. Eliza was never even blood. Joanna didn't blink. Miss Harding was legally adopted by Eleanor Harding when she was 13. That makes her family under every legal and ethical standard. Evan muttered something under his breath, then leaned back, arms crossed. This is insane. I stayed silent. I wanted to say a lot, but I didn't need to. Eleanor had already spoken for me. Joanna opened a thick leather-bound folder and began reading the official document. I, Eleanor Margaret Harding, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all prior wills and codicils, and declare this to be my final and binding last will and testament. She read for 20 minutes. Not a single mention of Gerald. No provision for Marissa. Nothing for Evan. Not even a token inheritance. Eleanor had left it all to me, the house, the accounts, her jewelry, her vintage car, even the royalties from a cookbook she'd self-published 15 years ago. It was absolute. At the end, Joanna looked up. Unless there's an immediate legal objection that you'd like to file, we can begin the transfer process today. The room was dead silent. Then Gerald stood up. This isn't over, he hissed. You'll hear from my lawyer. Joanna smiled politely. We already have. They left without another word. No goodbyes. No dramatic scenes. Just silence. And fury. I remained seated long after they were gone, my hands trembling beneath the table. Joanna reached out and gently pushed a small envelope toward me. Your grandmother wrote you a letter, she said. I opened it slowly. Her handwriting, elegant, curved, unmistakable, filled one page. My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, then everything went according to plan. I'm sorry for putting you in the line of fire, but I trusted you to carry my truth when I no longer could. You gave me more than care. You gave me dignity. A sense of belonging. You reminded me what love is supposed to feel like, and I want you to know how much that meant to me. The others, they were my family by blood. But you were my family by choice. I hope you'll take everything I've given you and build the life I couldn't. A life built on truth, not illusion. Don't be afraid of the weight of it. You've already carried more than they ever will. And one more thing, check the hidden drawer in the hallway credenza. There's one last surprise waiting for you. All my love. Grandma. I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. That evening, I returned to the house. The hallway credenza sat under the portrait of Eleanor and her husband, long gone before I was born. I ran my fingers underneath the top drawer until I found the small, worn groove she had once told me about when I was 16. With a soft click, the hidden drawer slid open. Inside was a velvet box and a manila envelope. The velvet box held her wedding ring, not the one she wore in public, but the original, battered and gold, with a tiny garnet embedded in the center. She told me once that she never replaced it, no matter how old-fashioned it looked, because real things don't need to sparkle. The envelope was heavier than I expected. Inside was a set of deeds, not just for the house, but for a plot of land she had purchased 2 years ago on the outskirts of Charleston. It included a note. I bought this place thinking I'd build a sanctuary for myself. I want you to have it. Do something good with it, Eliza. Something they never would have dreamed of. For the next few days, the fallout rippled. Articles appeared in the Charleston Post and Courier and local financial blogs. Rumors spread about Gerald being removed from several advisory boards. One of his largest clients pulled out entirely. Apparently, the optics of manipulating your mother's will and failing to secure anything weren't great for a man who sold himself as a legacy strategist. Marissa's husband was reportedly furious, not because she didn't inherit anything, but because she had secretly taken out loans expecting to. Their planned dream home was now an awkward 2-bedroom rental. Evan's startup fell apart. Turns out, potential investors don't like finding out that your seed money came from inheritance you didn't actually receive. I didn't rejoice in their downfall. But I didn't cry for them, either. A week later, I stood in Eleanor's garden, the morning sun bathing the flowerbeds in soft gold. I held the garnet ring in my hand and looked around at what she had built and what she had protected. She had given me more than an inheritance. She'd given me truth. She'd given me the power to rewrite a story that was never written for me. And now, for the first time in my life, it was mine. Weeks after the reading of the revengeAlley will, the dust still hadn't settled. The Harding name, once respected in Charleston's financial and social circles, now carried a quiet undertone of scandal. Clients dropped Gerald. Investors ghosted Evan. Marissa's charity committee paused her involvement. But the hardest blow wasn't financial. It was silence. No one wanted to be seen next to a family that tried to swindle their own matriarch. I had dinner alone every night in Eleanor's kitchen. Not because I didn't have options, I did. Co-workers and old friends had reached out after the news broke. But I needed the solitude, the stillness, the space to process not just what I'd inherited, but what I had lost. Eleanor wasn't just the person who raised me. She was the last person who had truly seen me. Late one evening, as the storm clouds rolled in from the coast, I found myself going through Eleanor's journals. There were 24 of them, lined up neatly in the bottom drawer of her bedroom wardrobe. Each year had a different color leather-bound, embossed with gold initials. I didn't open them right away. Part of me felt like I was trespassing. But then I remembered her voice. I wrote those for you. For the day I wouldn't be there to explain things myself. The entries were meticulous. Some mundane, grocery lists, recipes. Others, deeply personal. One passage hit me like a punch to the ribs. Gerald told me today that I needed a man's oversight for my investments. I wanted to laugh, but it wasn't funny. Not anymore. He forgets I started this family's fortune with the inheritance I received when my father died. Before he even knew how to tie a tie. Another. Marissa asked for $20,000 today for a kitchen remodel. She didn't ask how I was feeling after last week's hospital visit. Didn't even sit down. Just hugged me on her way out and said, "Love you, Nana," like it was a line from a script. And this one. Evan sent me an email with a GoFundMe link. No hi. No how are you? Just a subject line, urgent opportunity. I deleted it. Then cried for an hour. Then came the entries about me. Eliza made tomato soup from scratch today. Said she'd learned my recipe by heart just in case I forgot it. I cried when she wasn't looking. Sometimes I wonder if she even knows how much she saved me. And later. I watched Eliza fix the kitchen light today. She's not afraid of anything, not even grief. That's the kind of strength no inheritance can teach. I closed the journal with trembling hands. My chest ached, not with sadness, but something deeper. A kind of validation so pure, it left a mark. A week later, I stood on the land Eleanor had bought on the edge of town, 10 acres of quiet, sloping green, peppered with pine and wildflowers. She'd envisioned it as a retirement cottage. Instead, she left it to me with just one instruction. Do something good with it. At first, I didn't know what that meant. But the more time I spent there, the more I started to feel her presence again, not in the spooky, ethereal way, but in the way purpose lingers in a place waiting to be found. I remembered how often she talked about feeling forgotten in her later years. How many times she said, "You can live in the middle of a city and still feel like a ghost." That night, I took out my laptop and wrote a proposal. The Eleanor Harding Sanctuary Project would be a non-profit facility dedicated to elder care and dignity. Not just a nursing home, but a space for living. For connection. For community. A small library, a therapy garden, and shared kitchen spaces where elderly residents could cook together or teach younger people the skills they thought no one cared about anymore. I knew it was ambitious. I also knew I didn't need approval anymore. Eleanor had given me the land, the money, and more than that, she'd given me the why. Meanwhile, the family kept unraveling. Gerald tried to file a motion contesting the will, but Joanna Reese eviscerated it in court. She brought a digital forensic expert to verify the video's authenticity, and 2 of Eleanor's doctors provided written affidavits on her mental capacity. The judge didn't even blink. The case was dismissed in 20 minutes. But not before a local reporter picked it up. The headline on the Charleston Post was brutal. Charleston financial advisor denied inheritance after mother's secret will exposes family greed. Gerald didn't show his face in public for weeks after that. Evan went silent online. No more motivational quotes. No more updates about his blockchain health app. And Marissa. She posted a cryptic Instagram story about toxic people stealing your legacy, then deactivated her account. One afternoon, I returned home to find a letter in the mailbox. No return address. Handwritten. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You won, Eliza. I hope you're proud. M." No apology. No explanation. Just bitterness wrapped in stationery. I didn't respond. Because she was wrong. I hadn't won. This wasn't a game. It was survival. One morning, I walked past Eleanor's rose garden and saw a single new bloom. Vibrant, defiant, rising from the frostbitten earth like it had something to prove. I thought of Eleanor. Of how she'd spent her final years laying the groundwork for one final act of justice. And I thought of myself, not the girl in the corner of the room, watching her family carve up her life, but the woman who now held the pen. By mid-spring, the plans for the Eleanor Harding Sanctuary were fully approved by the city. The land Eleanor left me was now cleared and marked for development. I'd partnered with a local architectural firm that specialized in eco-friendly community spaces. Donations had started rolling in, thanks to the press coverage and a small grant from the Charleston Historic Preservation Society. Even some of Eleanor's former friends, women she'd had falling outs with over bridge games and book clubs, sent handwritten letters of support and modest checks. But that progress came with a cost. Because with every article, every mention, every whispered praise, I knew my family would come knocking. They didn't disappoint. It started with an email. From Evan. "Eliza. I know things have been rough between us, but I was wondering if we could talk. I've hit some complications with my company and could use advice from someone who understands long-term strategy and legacy planning like you do now. Also, congrats on the sanctuary project. Grandma would have been proud. E. The sheer gall of it was breathtaking. He hadn't spoken a word to me since the day of the will reading. But now that my name was circulating in philanthropic circles, I was suddenly worth reaching out to. I didn't respond. 2 days later, Marissa showed up at the gate of Eleanor's house. Yes, just showed up. Unannounced, dressed in her usual curated designer chic, holding a box of pastries from the overpriced French bakery downtown. I met her on the porch, arms crossed. "Eliza," she said, giving a forced smile. "You look well." "You look like you lost a campaign," I replied. Her lips tightened. "I came to talk. Maybe reset things. I'm not interested in pastries." She looked at the box like it had betrayed her. "I thought maybe we could try again. You and I. We were close once." No, we weren't, I said. You just ignored me less than the others. She sighed. Look, I'll be honest. Things haven't been easy. Nate lost his job. The new house fell through. And I could really use some help. Alone. Just until things settle. There it was. The same tune, different tempo. Marissa, I said softly. You didn't even visit Eleanor in the hospital unless there was a check waiting for you. That's not fair, she snapped. We all had our reasons for how we acted. Sure, I replied. And Eleanor had hers. She stared at me. Not with hate, but with something worse, pity disguised as entitlement. Don't let this money change you, Eliza. It didn't, I said, stepping back into the house. It revealed everyone else. And I closed the door. I thought that was the end of it. Until Gerald called. Not emailed. Not sent a letter. Called. I let it go to voicemail, of course. But I still listened. Curiosity is a beast. Eliza. This is Gerald. I won't waste your time. You won. Congratulations. But you've made things very difficult for this family. I've lost clients, credibility, and whatever scraps were left of my reputation. That may not matter to you, but it does to my children. They've suffered more than you know. I'm not asking for a handout. Just a meeting. A chance to talk. I need help. Please. Don't make me beg. My hands trembled as I put the phone down. Because here was the man who had once said I'd amount to nothing unless I married rich or stayed quiet like a good girl. The man who called me a mistake, a charity case, a burden on his mother's life. And now, he needed me. Eleanor, somewhere, would have smiled. 2 days later, I agreed to meet him, public place, daylight, neutral ground. A small cafe Eleanor and I used to visit on Sundays. He arrived in a wrinkled blazer, carrying an air of faded importance. Eliza, he said with a tight nod. I gave him nothing. Not even a smile. He got to the point quickly. My firm's collapsed. 2 clients have sued me. They claim I misled them about investment risks, things I learned from my own father. I guess Eleanor was right. I did become him. The irony landed with a dull thud. I'm not asking for a bailout, he continued. Just a referral. Someone in your new circles. I need to work again. I have nothing left. I stirred my coffee. Do you remember the last thing you said to me? Before the video played? He flinched. That was a bad moment. You said I wasn't family. He looked down. I was angry. No, I said. You were honest. There was silence between us. A long, unbearable pause. Then he said, your grandmother always believed in forgiveness. She also believed in consequences. I stood, placed a 20 on the table, and left him there. He didn't follow. Back home, I lit a candle on Eleanor's windowsill. It had become my nightly ritual. A way to say, I'm still here. I still remember. I wasn't proud of how good it felt to say no. But I wasn't ashamed either. Because for once, I wasn't the one apologizing. I wasn't the one crawling back to people who had already decided I didn't count. I had something they could never reclaim, not just the inheritance, but the truth. And they hated it. The next morning, I returned to the sanctuary land. Construction had begun. I stood where the main entry would be, the blueprint spread across a folding table. And I made a decision. There would be a wing named after Eleanor, but there would also be a garden, open to the public, planted in memory of those who had been forgotten. A place where people could bring photos of the loved ones they had cared for. A living archive of dignity. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes, it just means planting something in the soil where cruelty used to live and letting it grow anyway. The sanctuary opened on a quiet Saturday morning in late September. It was modest, for now just 2 finished wings, 1 community kitchen, a shared therapy room, and the beginnings of Eleanor's garden. The rest would come in phases. But it was enough to feel real. Enough to make her memory breathe again. The dedication plaque was simple. The Eleanor Harding Sanctuary. A place for the forgotten, built by those who remember. We had a soft opening, no media, no press releases. Just a group of local volunteers, a few residents, and some of the nurses who had helped Eleanor in her final years. They told me stories I hadn't heard. About how she used to correct doctors mid-diagnosis. About how she always tipped double on Fridays. About how she used to hum the same hymn before every appointment, "Come thou fount of every blessing." That night, I sat alone in the garden, surrounded by lantern light and fresh soil. The wind smelled like rosemary and pine. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what she would say if she could see it. "You did it, kiddo." Maybe something like that. Simple. Honest. The way Eleanor always was. A week after the sanctuary opened, I received another letter. This one was handwritten, but not by Marissa or Gerald. It was from Evan. "Eliza. I understand now. That's all I can say. You were there when it mattered. We weren't. There's no excuse for that. You're doing something good with what she gave you. Something none of us would have had the courage or integrity to do. If you're ever willing, I'd like to volunteer. No cameras. No press. Just show up and be useful. Maybe start small. Carry things. Clean. Listen. No expectations. Just. I'd like to try to be part of something real for once. I stared at the letter for a long time. I didn't cry. But I smiled. Because maybe not always, but sometimes people learn. Not because they were forced to, but because something inside them finally broke free. A month passed. Then too. I got into a rhythm, sanctuary mornings, board meetings, Sunday dinners in Eleanor's kitchen. I started writing again. A memoir. Not about the inheritance, but about what it means to be chosen. Not by blood, but by love. And slowly, I noticed things shifting. People who had ignored Eleanor's house now waved when they walked by. The garden got visitors who brought their own plants, their own stories. A woman named June came every Wednesday with cuttings from her sister's grave. A former nurse, Henry, started teaching young volunteers how to clean wounds and lift with dignity. They came because they needed somewhere that didn't just serve. It saw them. And then, on Christmas Eve, I found a small package at the foot of the garden gate. Wrapped in brown paper. No note. Inside was Eleanor's favorite mug, the chipped white one with blue speckles and the phrase "This too shall pass" printed on it. The one Marissa had once stolen after a family brunch because she liked the vintage vibe. I turned it over in my hands and noticed something etched underneath, newly added. I was wrong. Thank you for doing what we couldn't. It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. That night, I lit 3 candles in the windowsill. One for Eleanor. One for the version of myself I used to be, the silent one. The forgotten one. And one for the future. The house was warm. The lights were soft. And for the first time in my life, I felt full. Not because of the inheritance, but because I had finally inherited something worth holding on to. Clarity, peace, and purpose. Epilogue, the weight and the light. People always talk about justice like it has to be loud. Like it comes with revenge, or courtrooms, or raised voices. But sometimes, justice looks like a sanctuary built on the ashes of entitlement. Sometimes it sounds like the laughter of strangers in a kitchen that once held only silence. Sometimes, it's a quiet decision to plant something instead of destroy it. Eleanor didn't just give me a house, or money. She gave me the strength to believe that legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you lift forward. And I intend to carry hers for the rest of my life.